On the last two Sundays, two consecutive Sundays, two international bodies asked two members of this panel on a Thursday to adjudicate on a dispute. The award had to be out on the Monday. They travelled to the coast on the Sunday. The arbitration was heard. The hearing took place. The award was out on Monday and collected on Sunday afternoon. That happened in two consecutive Sundays. Another two members of this panel on a Monday morning by two international bodies were asked to give a snap arbitration on a very important point. They heard it in the morning, they sat over lunch and typed it out themselves. The award was paid for and taken up and honoured that same afternoon. This can happen, this does happen. When the parties want it, no one is more keen than the arbitrators. It takes much longer when things drag. Of course we have lots of cases and we want to get them out of the way. But when the two arbitrators are properly documented, there is not much waste of time. That's not saying that there isn't some waste of time. Of course we can better it and we will try to. But that's just one little point. It can be done. Now, may we have some more comments based on Mr. Vasopulo's very interesting comment there.
Chairman,
Mr. Newman of Tatum Bromwich.
Your panel has played the leg break and the off spin as well as the MCC. I wonder about the timing. He asked me a question recently which was similar to this. He also complained that it took a great length of time to get an arbitration award in London, in London, and wondered why we went for commercial arbitration and not to the commercial court, where he suggested it would be dealt with quicker and at no greater expense. I wonder what the panel's view on that is.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barclay?
Regarding speed, much depends on the nature of the arbitration. If you have 78 claims by a time charter against the ship owner, of which 22 are documented and the rest require further papers, it is obviously impossible to proceed speedily. And it would be even slower if you went to the commercial court, where every document has to be proved, agreed, approved, and everything else. There is a fair amount of flexibility in arbitration in that the arbitrators themselves, being practicing shipbrokers or ship owners or charterers, know exactly what certain expenses are for and who is liable for them. In those cases, adjudication is simple and very quick indeed. There is certainly no delay in producing the award once the hearing has been held. And I can safely say that amongst the members of this panel and the other members of the LMAA, you can reckon on an award being ready on the Monday following the week when the hearing is held. Now, I don't think any arbitration association in the world can pride itself on the same speed, mainly because most of the foreign associations have to send the award to the president of the association, who confers with other members of his committee, approves, sometimes signs it on behalf of the arbitrators before it is released. Luckily in London we don't have to do this. We can bear our own responsibilities, and I must say that for the last 10 years or so, awards here have been produced within a matter of days. The accusation of the lack of speed after the hearing I don't think holds good. On the other hand, if it is a special case, you will agree that if you have to find some 100 facts or so for the use of the courts, this necessitates a little more than 8 days, but not much more than a month. And this, I think, in itself is quite commendable.
Clearly, I'm sure we haven't satisfied Mr. Vasopulo, and I would like to try and do what we can here. He invited the members of the audience to give their comments, and I'd like to hear them. It doesn't matter what their views are. Would anyone else like to say anything on Mr. Vasopulo's comments?
Because remember, we have been accused, I think, by my ex-friend Mr. Vasopulo, of being a bit smug, and it'd be rather nice to hear why we are smug and in what respects this smugness ought to be got rid of.
Client of NW Spread. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vasopulo has suggested that a précis of the facts be presented to committee to be dealt with on the spot. My experience is, and perhaps the panel will confirm this, that when you start giving précis of anything, you're leaving out the fundamental points, and the award is all cockeyed on the main course.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Now, any any other questions on the floor? Yes.
As the only arbitration we've had in the last 10 years was with Tony Bisopoulos, and it took 4 years. 4 years to settle. It was in New York, actually, not in London. Truly, the point here is another point which was raised in one of the questions, Mr. Chairman, about the number of arbitrators. I personally don't think any arbitrator is smug. He hasn't got time to be. He has to do a lot of hard work. But you mentioned that there was a scheme for encouraging younger people to become arbitrators. And obviously, one has to have a few more arbitrators than are available at the moment. And isn't it possible that there might be some idea where, on an arbitration, the leading arbitrators who are here tonight could ask one or two of the younger members who might be interested in being arbitrators or interested in arbitration to sort of sit in as apprentices, or as barristers do with their own particular practices. And in this case, if the person continues his instruction and becomes more interested in arbitration, the arbitrators themselves can then, when they're asked to provide an alternative to themselves, if they're too busy, can mention one or two of these people who have had this particular experience. It's a way of sort of widening the scope. Mr. Chesterman mentioned, obviously, that no one wants to appoint an arbitrator who is untried, but the thing is, how does one become a tried arbitrator?
Thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. This is, once again, something that has exercised the mind of the committee for many, many years, and in fact, we had a standing, and we still have, a standing invitation to all members of the LMAA, that's not covering your point just at the moment, that they may attend any committee meeting of the association by mentioning ahead to the secretary, so we know the numbers, and one or two have taken advantage of this. We have also invited people to sit in at arbitrations, and if anyone here is interested, please don't make it a flood, of course, because we can't handle it, and lets the secretary know. We will let them know when a suitable arbitration is being heard, and they may sit in. All we have to do is to ask the parties if they mind. If the parties object, of course, we can't do so. But we're very prepared to do this, and it happens often. When solicitors are present, it's very usual for them to bring a pupil with them. The same as when barristers are present, they bring a pupil. We're very happy to have people who are interested enough to come along like this, because really we are interested in arbitration generally continuing, arbitration in London continuing especially. And if there's anything we can do, if you have any ideas that we haven't thought of, I'm sure you have, please let us know. We will consider them. Mr. Barclay would like to say something.
How many of you are prepared to devote a day or more than a day listening in at an arbitration? You're all very busy people. How many of you can afford to spend a couple of days away from your business listening in to an arbitration? And if you want to gain experience, of course, you've got to listen to more than one. This is a question I put to you because the invitation is a standing invitation, but we find that very few people are prepared to attend because of their other business commitments.
And it is not really much use just popping in for 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour. This really doesn't help at all. You've got to see a thing through. Now, once again, some of us here, because of our normal business commitments, hold hearings in evenings. This would be easier for you to attend. So if Mr. Barclay's office can accommodate another 60.
If
there... Oh, Mr. Morris. Would you take the roving mic, Albert, please?
I've made myself heard.
Oh, all right.
I would have thought that one possible answer to Mr. Bisopoulos' point about arbitrations would be if the parties themselves can agree to some précis of their particular dispute, especially if that dispute is presented through a solicitor. It helps so much. It very often happens, I find, that an arbitrator gets a huge file of documents and a covering letter which says, I have a dispute on with the owners and here is my file. And the arbitrator has to spend many hours going through the file. If this were summarized between the two parties, in other words, if one knew in very short words, very short sentences, what the dispute actually was, I'm very sure that we could get instantaneous or almost instantaneous decisions. Chairman, the question that I would like to ask is this. When arbitrators have disagreed and have appointed an umpire, each becomes functus officio as judge and goes through this strange transmogrification of becoming an advocate for his appointers. Would it not conform more with his dignity if he argued his own views before the umpire and not the views of his appointers, particularly where the dispute has several heads with only some of which he may agree?
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. I think we all heard that question. I think really it's something to do with the fact that an advocate really is the mouthpiece of the party appointing him. It is not up to him to put his own points of view. Of course, he uses his experience, but surely he is there because the party would like to say this, like to plead their case if they had the experience or the convenience to do so. Really, he's putting the case for the parties. But I would like perhaps to hand over here to Mr. Clyde to expound on this.
It's always a problem, the point that Mr. Morris has very rightly raised, it's always a problem. Is the arbitrator who has at his own will converted himself into an advocate still entitled to trail behind him those clouds of glory which he had when he was trying to sit in a judicial capacity? The two things are really inconsistent, you know. If you're an advocate, you're there to put the best face on your man's case. It doesn't mean in arbitration, which it sometimes means in court, trying to pull the wool over the other man's eyes, because that's nothing to do with arbitration. But you see, the trouble about deciding only to put before the umpire, once you have become an advocate, those views which you think are right, does argue a certain faith in your own infallibility, which I, for one, can't share. The man may be right and I may be wrong. He wants his argument put forward, and it seems a little stultifying for him if I decline to put that argument forward because I personally think it's not right. Only too often I'm just wrong.
One point I think that perhaps Mr. Blasopoulos may have missed, and that is that we are bound by the Arbitration Act. Now, the Arbitration Act is a very good act in some respects. It tells you exactly what an arbitrator can do. He can make orders, he can do this and he can do that, but it gives him no teeth whatsoever. You make an order for production of documents next Friday, and the fellow pitches it in his waste paper basket, and there's very little that an arbitrator can do about it, because he always has behind him the shadow of the courts and the court's idea of what they think is reasonable. I can give you an example of that. I had a case which had drifted on and on and on, and finally I got fed up and I fixed a date for the hearing. The case was then about 6 years old. An application was made to me to postpone the hearing for 3 months to get some more evidence. And I said, no. Unfortunately, both sides accepted that, and that was the end. But at one of the dinners, I met one of our learned judges and said, I said no on this occasion. Supposing they had gone to him, would he have said, well, after all the things 6 years old, another 3 months won't make any difference? Or would he have agreed with me and said, well, they've had 6 years, that's long enough? And his answer to me was, well, John, it would depend what I had for breakfast. And this is a position that an arbitrator always finds himself in. If he tries to wield the big stick, it's always possible for somebody to go to the court and say, look, this fellow's being damned unreasonable. I know it's 6 years old, but I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And then the arbitrator is entirely at the mercy of the judge and the mood the judge happens to be in when the question's put to him. If somebody would devise an arbitration act which would give the arbitrators some teeth, and some real teeth, not like mine, then I think we might push the dawdlers along very much quickly, because we've got to remember, it's no wish of ours that these things hang fire. We don't make awards, we starve.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, on that happy breakfast note, reluctantly I've got to drop the curtain, unless there's an extraordinary request.
Peter Reid, Kentshires. I seem to think that the panel has implied that an umpire is inevitably appointed. This didn't come out. You denied this initially, but in subsequent discussions it was suggested that the umpire remained behind the curtain. When is he put behind the curtain?
Oh, yes. Well, is that the...
Well, I've got another point.
Well, that one, shall we dispose of that? Arbitrators do not appoint an umpire until they've disagreed in normal cases. But if it's a case where they're going to hear evidence, and they don't know until they've heard the evidence whether or not they're going to disagree, clearly, or if counsel argue it, clearly in the interest of economy, they have an umpire sitting there in case they disagree, because if they disagree and then appoint an umpire, he's got to hear the whole of the evidence again. So that's the only occasion when they do it. Normally, an umpire is not appointed unless they disagree. In a normal joint award, there's no question of an umpire. Perhaps we didn't make that clear.
So that if one of the panel was to be asked to arbitrate, and the other arbitrator says, well, I want to fix the first meeting, yes, then you would say it would be wrong for one of the panel to say, well, I will not fix the first meeting until we have agreed upon an umpire.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That never happens.
That should never happen.
It doesn't happen.
No. Thank you. Now, the second point is, on this question of the arbitrators becoming advocates when they have failed to agree, it seemed to me Mr. Clyde was saying that this would be the normal procedure, that having formed your own opinions on the case, you then drop those opinions if you've got to submit to the umpire and put the case of the people who have nominated you. Is that so?
Yes.
But there's nothing to stop you putting your own views as well.
No, certainly not.
Well, then which do you do? Do you put your own views, or do you put the views of the people who have appointed you?
Well, the views must be put through the mouth of the advocate, and if he is of the view that one of the contentions which his man appointing him is putting forward is nonsense, it isn't very difficult to let that appear through the way he puts it. But the man is entitled, unless the arbitrator has formed the view that it's pure rubbish, to have his views before the umpire.
Yes, I find this very difficult, I'm afraid, because either you are an independent arbitrator who forms an opinion on the case and expresses it in front of an umpire, or else you're an advocate who supports the case of the people who have appointed you. And this, I think, was the point of the question I submitted, that it seems to me that this is the way arbitration is now conducted, that in many, many cases, the arbitrator, who after all is a professional man, and I believe someone did mention that he would starve if he didn't get his cases, must then begin to look at the case as if he is the advocate for the person who's appointed him. And although I'm assured by you, and I accept that 50% of the cases never go to an umpire, the umpire seems to me to sit behind that curtain on many more occasions than I like. And I just feel that this is the whole problem with arbitration in London at the moment. It's becoming slow and unwieldy, that in many, many cases the umpire is appointed at the very beginning, and that each side then argues the case on behalf of the people who have appointed him. And now, and this was now the panel denied it.
Mr. Reid,
I'm very glad to hear it.
I can assure you of that. Our figures are absolutely correct. Well, once again, the third time I'm lifting the curtain. It's a popular evening.
Answer that normally where two arbitrators are appointed and have their document, they have a preliminary meeting together, just the two of them, to see if they can agree, and if they can't agree, how far apart they are, and whether it's worth going on arguing among themselves. If they can agree, that's the end of it. If they find they can't agree, then they must go to an umpire, because somebody's got to make the decision for them. Now, where they appoint an umpire without having the case, having heard the case, is only when the case is one which is going to be argued by solicitors or counsel, and then they know nothing about it at all in the beginning, and especially when there are witnesses. And then there, as Mr. Clark said, you appoint the umpire in the interests of economy, because if the damn thing lasts a week or 10 days, it would be nonsense at the end of that for the two arbitrators to say, well, we don't agree. You can now go and argue the thing all over again in front of the umpire. And that's the only time that the umpire sits behind the curtain. And it is to avoid having to try the thing twice.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to bang this again. It doesn't seem to work. You can see that we've enjoyed ourselves here very much, but that wasn't the object of the thing. We hope you have.
Mr. Barclay, Mr. Chesterman, Mr. Clark, Mr. Clyde, we are most grateful to you for many things. The first one I would mention is for sitting in alphabetical order. Even just looked at from our point of view, it's Chinese alphabet. I'm sure we've all learned a great deal. We all know who we're going to recommend to our principals to act for them in the arbitration. From hearing all you four gentlemen, but I would suggest that many of the brokers should get on old boy terms with a number of the other arbitrators and find out what they think about various problems that might arise in shipping cases. Then they might know who to appoint as their arbitrators, because having got the views, they would know who was a good man. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for giving your time and explaining things so lucidly to us.
Thank you very much.